midterms are just 6 months away, and the primary season already upon us. With that come questions, not just about the candidates running in these elections, but how the elections themselves will be conducted moving forward, and the state of American democracy after what happened at the U.S. Capitol in January of last year. This was the scene on January 6, 2021. A mob of supporters of then-President Donald Trump, driven by his remarks at a rally beforehand, violently storming the Capitol in protest of lawmakers certifying Joe Biden's victory. Those challenging the results also within that building. 147 lawmakers, all Republicans in the House and Senate, objected to certifying the election. This as members of the GOP promoted Trump's false claim that the election was stolen. Since then, a constant drip of information as the bipartisan House Select Committee investigates. Among the latest developments, recordings that indicate concern by House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy that some of his Republican colleagues might have been inciting violence the day of the riot. And a series of text messages reported by CNN showing Trump's chief of staff Mark Meadows was caught between factions of the GOP pressuring him to challenge the election. And Georgia Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene this week claiming not to remember reported texts she sent to Meadows, including the suggestion that Trump declare martial law.
I'm sorry, I just don't recall. I don't recall that.
It's a pretty big suggestion. Don't think that would have...
We're talking about big tech. Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't recall.
Representative Greene is a supporter of the QAnon conspiracy movement, which believes the election was stolen from Trump despite the lack of evidence to support that. And there are others like her running for office. According to the latest tally from watchdog group Media Matters for America, there are 61 current or former congressional candidates across 21 states who have endorsed or given credence to QAnon. So a violent attack on the Capitol, a false election conspiracy, an idea to impose martial law. And we haven't even touched on the changes at the state level since the Capitol riots, which have sparked concerns about how elections are administered in the future. And this all paints a picture of a democracy in danger. In fact, the U.S. now considered a flawed democracy by the Economist intelligence unit. It bases this on 5 categories: the electoral process, civil liberties, the functioning of government, political participation, and political culture. Norway, New Zealand, Finland, Sweden, and Iceland are the top-ranked democracies according to this index. The U.S. notably not making the cut. The U.S. ranks 26th with political culture and functioning of government dragging down the overall score. Joining us now to discuss all of this is Uriel Epstein. He's executive director of the Renew Democracy Initiative, a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. Uriel, we appreciate your time. How precarious of a situation is the U.S. in right now when it comes to democracy?
Thank you, Jay, for having me on. The situation is precarious. I'm not going to try to mince words here. But I should note that, number one, our institutions are strong, and they have survived significant tests. The key is that we actually need to be prioritizing those institutions and giving them the support that they need to survive. Now, in the list that you showed early on, right, the countries that are ranked really well, New Zealand, Iceland, these countries are much smaller, with more homogeneous populations than the United States has. That means that for us to maintain our democracy is actually a much greater challenge than it is for them, because we have an incredibly multi-ethnic democracy. We have an incredibly large democracy with an incredible number of competing interests. Our founders thought that these things were actually a benefit. Madison believed that having a significant number of competing factions would ensure that no one faction was able to dominate all the others. And so what we need to be doing is empowering the institutions we already have in place, promoting the norms that allow for freedom of speech, divergence of opinion, and so forth, while simultaneously promoting some semblance of a common set of facts so that we can actually harness these various points of view, these various perspectives into a single polity, into a single political system, into a united political system that's actually able to deliver on the promises that we make to the public.
And Uriel, I mentioned earlier QAnon gaining traction in the political world, and a poll this year from NPR Ipsos found 2/3 of Republican respondents believe voter fraud helped Joe Biden become president, which of course is not true. Mainstream Republicans would say this is just a fringe wing of the party. So just how pervasive is this within the GOP, and what do these numbers say about where the party is heading moving forward?
These numbers are a pretty significant concern. You know, it's something that I've been worried about for a little while now. And the Republican Party has been headed in a direction where I think a host of significant, prominent conservatives need to take stock and need to pull back. And we've started seeing this. I mean, there are a number of conservatives that are starting to do this who may not necessarily be the kind of leadership of the party, but whether they're folks like Liz Cheney, Adam Kinzinger, Evan McMullin, who's running in Utah, there are people who are trying to sound the alarm. The challenge that we're faced with right now is that the crux of the Republican Party still remains very much indebted and committed to those who would question the election, those who would, if not openly endorse the points of view of QAnon, at the very least be okay with those points of view being part of the broader coalition. And I think ultimately our job is to try to convince these people that in a functional democracy, we need to reject those points of view the same way that the conservatives years ago rejected the Birchers.
And Uriel, I want to play a portion of a report from our Joe St. George from the battleground state of Ohio this week. He talked to voters there about what topics matter to them, and I'll get your thoughts on the other side. Let's listen.
One thing that struck me. Did you ever think about what happened on January 6th? Is that like...
No.
A lot of issues that dominate partisan talk shows...
It's not really one of my major things.
...didn't come up during my visit. Voters have other priorities.
Now, January 6th, obviously not top of mind, and those were two Biden voters. And polling from late February shows they're not alone. NPR PBS NewsHour asked what Americans want the Biden administration to prioritize. No surprise here. Inflation, overwhelmingly the top response. Notably, voting laws only had 11%, and the investigation into January 6th, 3%. So, Uriel, are President Biden and other Democrats talking about U.S. democracy enough? Is it incumbent upon them to try to make voters care more about it?
Yes. Yes, simple as that. But the question is how you're going to talk about it. You need to talk about democracy in a way that is compelling to the average voter, in a way where people actually understand that this matters to them and that it matters to their bottom line, much in the same way as inflation matters to their bottom line. That's why at the Renew Democracy Initiative, we're launching the Front Lines of Freedom, where we've pulled together over 100 dissidents from oppressive countries who can offer a positive message about how they were inspired by American democracy, even as they were fighting for some small semblance of the rights that you and I get to take for granted. And so what I would advise to the administration and to people in the political system writ large is to think creatively about how they can convey to people the importance of democracy in a way that actually matters to them. Because inflation is easy to understand, right? It hits our pocketbook. How much money we pay at the grocery store is something we feel every day. Meanwhile, a lot of these culture war issues, right, are really emotional. So they're also really easy to understand. Meanwhile, the way that I've heard a lot of Democratic leaders talking about democracy has been incredibly wonky. And quite frankly, it feels really distant from what we feel day in and day out. And it doesn't really surprise me, unfortunately, that a lot of people are starting to move past January 6th. And so what we really need to do is, I think, highlight the voices of those people who can, A, understand the importance of January 6th, and B, convey to folks the fragility of democracy as a whole. That's why we've been highlighting all of these dissidents. They know how fragile democracy is, but they also can offer a message of hope. And those are the two things that I think need to pull together, is on the one hand the fragility and the threats facing our democracy, and on the other hand the possibilities for the future, for to offer people a positive vision of what our democracy could look like.
Uriel Epstein with the Renew Democracy Initiative. We appreciate you coming on. Thanks.
Thank you so much for having me.